Hello, everyone. Welcome to Empty Cloud, Buddhist Insights to Monk Chat. So today is the day where all the questions that we ignored during the week, you can ask again, and we'll happily answer all your questions about Dhamma, about monastic life, how to practice or things like that. So yeah, this is the time for you, to make you can make questions, or maybe even if you want some practical advice or anything like that, or want us to share some experiences we had, in our practice or travels or reflections on Dhamma that we have. I think there might be some stuff. We see some things in the chat, right?
You want to start with just the Namo Tassa?
Oh, yes, the Namo Tassa. Okay. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Okay.
Do you want to read? Do you want me to?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah. Use your glasses.
Okay. So we have a question from Rick. Hello, Rick. We'll say also hello, Julie, Kumu, Chad, Jayanta, Luisa, Jerry. And Rick says, does the Buddha offer guidance when we interact with a person whose emotional age is much less than their actual age, i.e., an adult who throws tantrums like a 2-year-old?
I don't remember a sutta like that specific about someone like that, but the Buddha does talk about people who are mature or immature, right? The wise and the foolish. So to be a foolish person, to be an immature person, doesn't necessarily mean that you're young. You can be a very senior person in age and be foolish and stuff like that. This is very particular. You're specifically talking about a specific person here, I'm pretty sure. But the thing is always to approach that one with inner clarity, with your own sati, right, and sampajanya, and have that very good discernment, that Dhamma Vichaya, and come from a place of loving kindness and compassion and mudita and upekkha, right? So as long as we hold to our Buddhist principles, as long as we're cultivating wholesome states of mind, we can interact with anybody. Mean people who are like yes men and try to flirt with you and build you up and tell you how beautiful you are, even though it may not be so true, or you might be in a dangerous place, you might be in a place of luxury, a place of lacking. It doesn't really matter. As long as you're practicing the Dhamma will help you have a unperturbable mind, right? Like an akupacetto vimutti. You can find that serenity, that unperturbable state of mind, liberation of mind, as long as we're practicing the Dhamma. So we don't have to really get into specifics. The specifics don't really matter, actually. As long as you're practicing Dhamma, as long as you're established in the 7 factors of awakening, as long as you're established in the 4 Brahma Viharas, right? As long as you're established in the Noble Eightfold Path, you'll be fine no matter who you interact with. And we can't control the actions of others, so we can just watch our mind. And when an unskillful state arises in our mind, we notice it. We notice that it's unskillful, that it's not for our benefit, for the benefit of others, for the benefit of any, right? And we work on eliminating that unwholesome state and cultivating wholesome states in the mind, right? But obviously, if you ever find yourself being overwhelmed or in danger, run, get away, hide, go to the bathroom. No one will ever question you. You get like, where are you going? I got to go to the bathroom. No one's going to tell you no, right? Bathroom is a very valid excuse to use, and we don't owe anyone a response. We can just stay quiet. We don't have to say anything, right? I mean, that's one of our rights, constitutional rights, right? The right to remain silent. We have that right, and in the Dhamma, you also have the right to remain silent. We see the monks and even the Buddha remain silent many times when things are foolish. People ask, like, what was I in the past? Who was I in the past? Is the universe infinite? Is it not infinite? Etc. Etc. No, thank you. I will not participate. Yes. Pada, any ideas?
I enjoyed what Bante said. Nothing comes to mind except there was one thing that was not about this particular thing that comes to mind, but that the Buddha does talk about dealing with difficult people. And unfortunately, I can't remember the specifics, but he gives 5. I think it's a list of 5. So maybe check the Anguttara 5s, where he kind of goes through if someone's being very difficult, like you're having a very hard time with aversion towards them. He goes through 5 things, and basically the number one principle is you don't get angry. Right? Or if you do get angry, you don't indulge in the anger is a better way of saying it, right? Maybe you get angry and you can't necessarily control that, because if you haven't trained your mind, like Bante was saying, we just have to establish ourselves in these principles, and we'll be working on it. So maybe you will get angry, but you establish yourself in the training. But he does, basically that's not the solution. So you don't say, okay, the solution is I should be angry at this person. But the very last option, I do remember the last one, is that let's say that you apply the Dhamma, you use the Dhamma, even you apply kante, you apply patience, you apply a little bit of endurance. The last thing he says is you just reflect they're the owners of their karma. So like if someone's throwing a tantrum and it's very upsetting to you, and you're having a hard time having a mind of loving kindness towards them, you're having a hard time understanding where they're coming from with compassion, you're having a hard time, relating to them in another way where you're like, they're causing their own suffering, and I have compassion. At the very least, you can say, you know what, I'm not going to get angry because they're going to reap the results of this. Right? So we don't do it with a spiteful attitude, like, oh yeah, they're going to suffer so bad, and I'm so happy that this anger is going to cause them to be ugly in their next life or something, right? We don't think about it like that, but we do think, this is really difficult for me, but you know what? I don't have to get angry thinking this isn't appropriate, this isn't right, this person should know better. Because you can just know this is their karma, and these are their actions, and it's their responsibility, and they're the ones who have to reap the results of those actions. They're the ones who have refuge in those actions, whether good or bad. And you can reflect on that, and that can help you set it down. That's the last thing. Now, that's not the ideals thing the Buddha says, actually. The ideal thing is what Bante was saying, or mudita, or upekka, or even compassion or investigation and applying mindfulness. And those things are going to be there, but in the very last case scenario, you can reflect on they're the owners of their own karma, and this is their thing. I'm angry, but you know what, it's their thing, and my anger is my thing, and that's at least what you can do, the Buddha says. That just came to mind. But I don't remember the other steps besides the essentials. Okay, and Julie has a question. Dear Venerables, is it possible to make this morning's Dhamma teaching available on your channel? I saved it when I caught the last 5 minutes, but unfortunately it shows up hidden or unavailable. Yes, so that was something I noticed, that it was a little bit strange, and I don't know what happened. It's on the Facebook channel, and so I was going to put it up, but I just wanted to make sure that everything it wasn't something else going on with the platform or what. So it should be made available tomorrow. Tomorrow after, maybe not tonight, but tomorrow I'll fix it. But if not, it's on the Facebook channels, Buddhist Insight Facebook. But yeah, that was strange, and we were. I let someone know, and they said they'd look into it and things like that. So we'll see. And Jerry says, I've heard the concept that there is no meaning in life except that which you create. What is right view concerning that concept? Bante.
Yeah, so one right view, although it's not like, there's many ways to look at right view. One is the karma, right? Karma and vipaka. So, or karma and pala, the actions and results. So is there like, oh, this is your mission in life, or this is all our missions as humans in life? I mean, there really isn't anything like that we see in that comes to mind in the suttas. But there is this very distinguished between, there is these like kusala, right, and akusala. There is like good and bad actions. There are wholesome and unwholesome actions, right? So the meaning would be to develop and generate and act in a kusala, or a good way. That's the meaning, just to be good, right? And to avoid the bad, right? Like sabi papasa akaranam kusala sa upasampada. Sachitta pariyoda pinamitam buddhanusasanam, right? Avoid all bad, avoid all evil. Papa's even worse. Avoid doing the evil, do good, and to purify your mind. This is the teaching of all the Buddhas, right? So there's not like no purpose, like my purpose is to be an artist, or my purpose is to, save the world, or the purpose is for everyone to unite with the universe, or none of these kind of things. There's none of those purposes. There is just conditionality, right? There is idapachayata paticca samuppada, right? Causes and conditions that have ethical value, a moral valence to it, a moral value, a good and bad value, right? That lead to higher states or more pleasant states of being and lower states of being in this very moment, in this very life, and in future lives, and in many lives to come. So, from this kind of understanding of dependent origination and how actions, whether mental, verbal, or physical, work, our purpose would be to work with these causes and conditions and develop them to the highest level. So, we reach that state where the mind is so clear, so pure, that we're able then to penetrate reality and get the higher knowledges of like the Four Noble Truths and see clearly dependent origination, because our mind has been so purified from all the wholesome actions that we did, and be able to see all the asavas, all the influences, and see how this mind is working through the five khandhas and things like that. But I mean, on a very like samsaric level, samsara is just actions and results. That's all it is. Action and result, action and result. Unskillful action, skillful action. Unwholesome action, wholesome action. Good actions, bad actions. And the results of that in this very moment, in the next life, being reborn according to their karma. That's the second knowledge of the Buddha, and the first knowledge of the Buddha, right? Of the actions he did in the past. I was like this, and then I was like that. I did this, and then I was like that. That's karma, right? So it's just that living according to this principle of knowing what's wholesome and unwholesome. Bada, anything come to mind?
No, I think that's about the same. The only other way of putting it was essentially the same thing that Bante was saying, but maybe as helpful if you've heard this before, is holding emptiness and compassion. You might hear this talked about a little bit more in other traditions, but emptiness is kind of like meaninglessness. Everything's empty. It's like what Bante was saying. This is the dependent origination. So if it's just cause and effect, and then you really, when you really dig down into that, it means it means that there's no meaning because there's no actual thing, there's no substance, there's no that we can find, right? We can't say that. We can't say inherently there is no inherently existing substance, because we can't even say that. We can't even speak about the substance or lack of substance of anything. It can't be established. That's what emptiness is saying, that there is no way to establish anything, any kind of substance, including the idea of some kind of emptiness that's a substance. So basically, that's meaninglessness. But then there's the compassion, and then the idea of this is like everything's empty, but we still respond with compassion. We still have this compassion because within this framework of samsara, like Bante was saying, there is this, there is wholesome and unwholesome, and even that is meaningless. Even that isn't actually inherently good, inherently evil. Like if you want to suffer, actually Buddhism has the perfect recipe, and there's no problem with it. If you want to go to hell, for instance, or you want to be reborn as an animal, or you want to be reborn as a deva, whatever you want to do, it's perfectly fine. It's just that most people don't really want that. In fact, no one really wants that, but they might think they want it, right? So, but the Buddha gives a perfect recipe. If you want to suffer horribly in this life and in the next life, just be a horrible person. Just do bad things, treat yourself badly, treat others badly, dull your mind, and you'll suffer horribly, and in the next life you'll suffer as well. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's just suffering. It's painful, and it's not pleasant for yourself or others. So, and it's even if we think we want it, it's not actually what we want, because we only want that because we might think it'll make us satisfied, it'll make us at peace, because I deserve to suffer. It'll just make me. I just want to cease existing because that'll make me peaceful, or I just want to suffer because that's what I deserve. And we feel like that actually brings contentment, as much as it seems backwards to think that way. So at the end of the day, what this comes down to is that things are meaningless, and yet we act with compassion, even if we fully penetrate, like Bante was saying, into emptiness. Still, we don't say, oh, wholesome, unwholesome, it's all empty, it's all meaningless, therefore we can break all the precepts now that we're awakened. That's not how it works. Actually, the Buddha says it's impossible for an arahant, fully awakened being, to intentionally kill. to have that intention and desire to kill a being. It's impossible, because in order to do that, you also have to buy into the anger. You have to buy into that intention. So naturally, compassion arises, and that, I would say, yeah, that balance is another way of putting it. The same thing that Bhante was saying. Okay, Stevie, hello. I've listened to like 10 hours of Bhante Punaji's talks. Feel as though I've stared into the abyss. Any thoughts on grounding? Bhante, I think you're most qualified to address this question.
So actually, Bhante Punaji, my teacher, would give a good balance. When people would come to the temple, his emphasis was always on metta. Metta, 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 metta. And not until you had this very established grounding in metta, then we would do anapanasati and everything, because he would preach the Dhamma on a very intellectual level. So his way of counterbalancing that was always like the retreats would be metta all the time. So yeah, metta. And not only metta, meditation, like Bhante Punaji would say, like my teacher, since the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep, acts of loving kindness and compassion toward those around you all the time, right? So that's the important thing. When we get to up here, then we need to kind of bring it in here, right in the chest and in the body, and act from there. So yeah, just try to practice generosity. If you live with any siblings or partner, be nice and just be kind, and go out of your way and get out of your head and get into your body and start doing things for people, and that'll be a good way of grounding yourself.
Okay. Namo Buddhaya from Bihar. Good evening, Manal. Gomo says, the perceptions are explained as a mirage, a simile for perceptions. This is in the Pinapindupama Sutta. Is it due to their anicca, or is it due their anicca nature or temporary nature? I don't know if you're asking is that one thing, like anicca or temporary, but we can talk about this in general.
I mean, that anicca or temporary applies to all of them. Like, that's just a general rule for all of them. That's why they're all illusory, right? Like you can't grasp onto them because they're always changing. And whether it's an illusion, right, which is like misunderstanding of like the senses, or a delusion, which is like a cognitive, right, misunderstanding. They're both temporary. They're both temporal, right? It doesn't matter. They're both impermanent. They're unstable too. They're always moving, right? If you see a mirage of heat, this is waves, right? It's like always moving. And the magician relies on sleight of hand, right? Movement, right? For you to look over there when he's doing stuff over here. So it's all about movement. It's all about change, right? Specifically, why mirage is used for perception. I think because when we think about mirage, has to do with the visual, right? And usually when in the list of like when it goes through the senses, it starts with the visual one, right? Like most of the time, I remember it starts with like the eyes, chaku, and then it goes through all the other ones. So it's kind of like we're very visually dominated, right, as human beings. I mean, it's representative also in the brain, how much retail space is dedicated to vision. So I think that's why, mirage is very obvious to us. Then we can apply that to hearing, tasting, smelling, touching, and all the other ones. I just think it's a very powerful imagery for us to be able to understand why perception is like a mirage, because we're so visually dominated.
Yeah, the only other thing that comes to mind, I think, as Bhante was saying, the anicca is a kind of constant theme, and that's what sort of makes this meaningful in terms of, if it was permanent and if it was stable, then the Buddha wouldn't be talking about that. He would be talking about how that's what you should rely on. The Buddha even says, actually, if there were something that were permanent, unchanging, everlasting, then that would be worth grasping at, but it cannot be found. So that's true. But I think one thing that comes to mind for the mirage too is that mirage is made by the mind. In a very conventional sense, we say a mirage isn't real. It's made by your mind. It's a hallucination of some sort, or a kind of a optical illusion. And that's kind of how perceptions often are. So on a very mundane level, we were talking the other day about, let's say that someone's really angry at you and they're screaming at you. You might perceive them as I'm sorry, they're not screaming, but they're angry at you. You might perceive them as yelling, as screaming, as very aggressive, as violent. But someone else who perceived the same situation, they just saw someone who was a little bit angry. It wasn't that big of a deal. But you felt threatened. So then you perceive something very different. It's like when you're in the desert and you're very thirsty, you might perceive just some kind of visual thing in the distance as water. But someone else who just had a drink of water, they don't see that. So it's made by the mind. And it's the same way. When we're very greedy, we start perceiving things in certain ways because we're desiring it. But when we're very full after, say, for the example of food, let's say we're very full and maybe we overate, then we perceive food very differently. Sometimes after, because monks don't eat at certain times, certain things you might not relate to it as food that you would eat or buy or purchase, because you just don't eat that. But if you're in another position where, oh, I can eat this, or I can buy this, or this is for me, you perceive it in a different way, and that's all created by your mind. So I feel like that's another thing about mirage, is that, it's kind of the Buddha saying this illusory transient thing, it's a mirage because it's made by the mind. And then there's other ones like the plantain trunk for sankharas. Why the plantain trunk? Also impermanent, but also because sometimes when we make decisions, we think I'm the maker, I'm the doer, there's a core that's choosing, but it's like when you peel it back, it's all just there's no core there. Or the consciousness, we think we're experiencing reality, this is real, but no, it's actually just kind of this. So they all have a little nuance there. I feel that's what comes to mind for perception, but someone else might relate to it differently.
I just thought about the example from Shrek when he tells Donkey, ogres are like onions. He's like, what? They're smelly? They make you cry? No, we have layers. We have layers. You pull them all out, but there's that onion's empty in the middle too, right? So emptiness in Shrek. Go watch Shrek.
Yeah. Okay. Chad says, sometimes I see vijnana described as some kind of additional knowledge drawing out qualities from the object instead of just the bare awareness arising from sense contact. What should I make of this? I assume you're saying in the suttas? So.
Yeah, so I mean, the way it's usually the description is given for vijnana is that it distinguishes flavors, right? Like what's bitter and like what's sweet and what's salty and all those things. I don't remember the exact list, but there is this level that vijnana has, that it's able to like distinguish or discern things, and that's how I take the V. But let's not get too literal with the etymology, right? But yeah, it does have this ability that distinguishes, or it directs towards things, right? Like seeing, tasting, smelling, and stuff. And then in some Buddhist traditions, they say like vijnana can only be aware of a certain thing at one moment at one time. Then what's happening is just switching through all the senses really fast, right? So there is that thing. It's not like an open, wide awareness where it's aware of everything at once, but it's very much directed towards each thing. So that's how I would see it when it's described as kind of like this picking out the qualities. It's not really the qualities, but it's really like focused on one thing. It can't do many things at once. And then this bare awareness, I've never heard that term. That one's usually used for like sati, or the practice of satipatthana or mindfulness, like bare awareness, right? But I've never heard that being used for vijnana. Vijnana is a form of awareness, right? Well, it's a form of knowledge, literally, like jnana, right? And awareness is to know. It's just in some sense, right? It's a form of knowledge. But I wouldn't, get too particular or dig too much deep into it. I don't think there's like something special there that we can find. But I think if we just look at the salayatana, like the senses, right? And like Chaku Vijnana, Sota Vijnana, it's very obvious how Vijnana is kind of working right there. And then at the description in the 5 khandhas, when the Buddha describes what are the things that Vijnana focuses on, and it's this ability to discern between different things. About that, anything?
Yeah, I was just thinking that you might be today. Actually, the sutta that we read was the King Sukopama Sutta, and in that sutta, the Buddha gives a simile. He gives a simile of, it's about samatha vipassana, and he gives a simile of a city. And in the middle of the city, there's a lord of the city who just receives the messages. And the Buddha says that the city is the body, and the lord of the city sitting in the center is vijnana. And that's a little bit of a different way of talking about it, right? That's very almost mysterious or enigmatic. Like this consciousness is the lord in the city sitting in the middle that's receiving all the information. And it has a little bit of a different ring to it because it's also less technical. So sometimes the Buddha uses words in very specific ways. Sometimes it's more of just it's more drawing out a different nuance of it. And I think that might be what you're saying, because I remember also other suttas, which are less common, where they'll say, for instance, their consciousness grasps onto that, like their consciousness goes after it. It grasps onto it. And we need to let go. The consciousness has to let go of it. And it's almost like this consciousness is this agent that's holding on. It's not just the arising of what you're saying, bare awareness, the arising at the eye. We're aware of that thing. We're aware of this thing. And I think it goes into what Bhante is saying, where there's this quality of awareness, and this is going to be a big word here, but in Western philosophy, there's a school called phenomenology, and they say that consciousness has intentionality. So that jumble of syllables basically means that when we observe our experience of awareness, when we observe our experience of consciousness, we find that it's not just that every piece of information, we're equally aware of it 100% all the time, no matter what. It doesn't work that way, right? And we all experience this. For instance, if we're focused on something, and then we refocus our eyes, we realize that actually, say, if I look at the computer screen and I focus on the text, if I'm very intently focused, I might only see the text, or I might very specifically be experiencing the text, but then I kind of zoom out and I realize that the whole screen was in my awareness. And then I zoom out more and I realize that the whole room is in my awareness, and that even Bante's ear, I can see that in my awareness. And it was always kind of potentially there. But my consciousness, it's directed towards things, like Bhante was saying, where it has this quality to it. And if you kind of lean into that a little bit, you could get a little bit, and you wanted to express something that's less technical, the Buddha could speak a little bit more freely. So it kind of goes outside of this box where maybe we're used to, like the Abhidhamma, right? Vijnana means this, it means this and that, and it applies to this and this and that, and this means that, and this doesn't cross into that domain, and it's a list of technical terms. And that's useful, but sometimes the Buddha would step out of that, I think, because he's kind of, what is this Lord of the City? Or that sounds cool. What is this? And he kind of gets you thinking about it and thinking about your experience in a new kind of way, and relating to terms in a way that's a little bit more loose. Like how we speak now. When I speak now, sometimes I might say an English word and I mean something specific, and then I say the same word and it means kind of the same thing, but it's a little bit different. And then imagine 2,500 years later, someone was listening to a transcription of my speaking, and then they started analyzing this word, and they're like, well, when he said that word there, it seems like he was saying it slightly differently here. And it's like, yeah, because that's how we usually speak. It's not always very particular. So the Buddha was very particular. But if you do run into occasions where he uses like vijnana more freely, you should look into what is the practical, moral, or the implications of using it that way, and then focus in on that. And focus, I would say, it might be helpful. Let's say you can focus whatever you want to do, but it might be helpful if you look at what he's pointing at rather than how the categories fit together. Because sometimes the categories, like how does the Salayatana fit into the 5 khandhas, and fit into the dhatus, and fit into the 6 elements, and fit into this, and you could do that, and Buddhists have done that for a long time. But it's not really what the Buddha was trying to do. Okay, he was more trying to give you these frameworks and these ways of thinking and relating to the world that help us let go. He wasn't so much trying to create kind of a systematic list of terms that we study. So we can do that, and it's not that that's not beneficial. Actually, it is beneficial to think about things like that. But it will burst your bubble if, when you run into things like this, it will seem strange. And then sometimes people can develop odd views. They might develop wrong views because they think, oh, vijnana is not just the senses. Look, it's the Lord in the center. Maybe that's a different vijnana. Or then they think, oh, the 4 elements, they might think something about the elements. They might think something about space. They might think about any kind of thing that you can imagine. If you take a term very, very literally, and then it breaks out of that in another sutta, you could get a little bit lost in the weeds, you could say. So I look at the implications. Sometimes the Buddha uses vijnana more freely. And I think that was understood in his audience. It's the mind, it's your awareness, it's your consciousness. The word consciousness in English, I'm sure you
has so many meanings. Yeah. It's a ticket of fields, or what does the Buddha say? Yeah, like that example. Like there's so many views about it, right? Yeah. The ticket of views, it's like a field of something. Yeah, consciousness means something different to everyone in the West.
Yeah, and awareness. So just think about it in the time of the Buddha. When he says the word consciousness, sometimes terms can be a little bit flexible. Okay. Julie, dear Bhante Sanata Vihari, I listened to what I believe is your interview this afternoon, and I was wondering if you have a YouTube channel. I saw this in a live with Venerable Tri Dao. Bhante, try that.
Yes, I do.
Plug.
Yeah. Thank you for plugging me, Venerable Tree Dao. Yes, yes. I have a YouTube channel. It's just called Los Angeles Anatta Vihari. I don't have much stuff on there. It's all like really dedicated uh, to like either this. It's just like recordings I've done of events at the temple, which most people will find. If you're not Sinhalese, you probably won't find that exciting. Or like this one program I did with Alan Pito during the pandemic of like a daily practice that you can do for a week. But if you go to my YouTube channel and you go to playlist, I have all the talks I've given for other places, and there's where you can see all the stuff. Like everything that goes here, I put it on my playlist. Talks that I give at other temples, it goes on my playlist. So if you go to Los Angeles Anatta Vihari on YouTube, and then you go to my playlist, you'll see all these talks that I give all around the world. Um, but I just started a new YouTube channel called the Iconoclastic Monastic, the DA, because I really want it to be different and iconoclastic. So you can go there, and that channel's dedicated to interviews uh, with different monastics or Buddhist people or just thinkers. And we touch on topics which are, we feel like misunderstood or taboo or stigmatized, or things that we feel people just don't have knowledge about, and present the Dhamma from many different avenues, and kind of give a place where everyone can kind of just share their experience and how they live the Dhamma differently. So that's a very new project, and there's where I'll be uploading the live that happened earlier today. It's going to be uploaded there, the full interview between me and Bhante Tree Dao. So you can watch it there at the DA, Iconoclastic Monastic, or you could just put Los Angeles Anatta Vihari, and there's my other YouTube channel. And then I have a Spanish one, unless you speak Spanish. If you do, anyone out there, Monje en la Modernidad. Then there I have actually more content, like going through the suttas and meditations, like actual useful things. I think the channel's a little more, what people expect from a Buddhist channel.
Very great. Also, Elliot, if you have any questions, feel free to just raise your hand so I can see in the corner of my eye. We have someone in the room here. Just wanted to make sure. Okay. Okay, that's not a question. Shadow of Label says, why would right view and wrong view have no relation to fascism? Bhante?
Why would right? Because fascism is like let's say, like a worldly thing, right? It has nothing to do with how phenomena actually work. Phenomena are lacking intrinsic reality. They're ephemeral, right? And they're impersonal. So when we're talking about right view, we're talking about this. So when we talk about the Four Noble Truths, when we talk about Paticca Samuppada, these are all kind of like methods to help us understand the nature of reality. And fascism is just not part of that, right? Like fascism is not an intrinsic thing to reality. It doesn't describe anything about phenomena, about the way the universe works, about how samsara works, right? It's a result, a symptom of people misunderstanding of reality, right? People see reality as permanent, as mine, as pleasurable, right? And then fascism is a system in which people act inappropriately, unwholesome karma thoughts, and going back to what we said in the beginning, they produce unwholesome or bad karma, whether in mind, speech, or body, because of their wrong view, right? Of not being able to see reality. So this samadhi, the right view, really has to do with seeing anicca, dukkha, and anatta, right? Seeing impermanence or instability of reality, seeing that it's inherently unsatisfactory because it's empty, it has no meaning, and it's impersonal, right? There's no one there. There's no real entity there. There's no soul, right? And the wrong view comes from seeing permanent where the things are impermanent, seeing satisfactory or happiness where things are unsatisfactory, and seeing a real self. From that point of view, a couple steps later comes like fascism and racism and, all these other kind of systems, right? And cultures that bring suffering into the world.
Yep. And Shadow of Label also says, why is there no good or wrong in Buddhism when there is right view and wrong view?
Yeah, that's why I don't like right. My teacher Bhante Puniju would never use right. Like sama can mean right in the sense that something is whole, complete, right? Like it's all the parts are there, right? It's a full view, we can say, of reality. But it's not to be taken so literal, like in the Western context, where there's like, right, this is correct in the only way. It's not what it's saying, right? It's just like the harmonious way of seeing reality, right? To be in harmony with reality is not to go against it. To bring it back to my answer to your previous question, right? To be in harmony with reality, not to go against reality. That means seeing that all things are transient, ephemeral, unsatisfactory, and empty of self. Yeah. So that's really what right view is trying to get to, and wrong view is when you see the opposite.
Okay. Stevie says, retreat question. I want more time at my temple. Is it not advertised, it is not advertised, but I want to stay there for a few days. How can I ask the monks? What are some guidelines?
Which temple is it? I mean, most temples have a website and they'll tell you how to do it. And if it's not advertised, then you should just ask the monks, directly. I think that's the best way. So just give them a call. Next time you go there, ask them, what's going on there. I know my temple is a place where we don't advertise or anything. It's all, but in my temple, people who do want to stay can stay, but we usually send them to our meditation center if they want to stay at the temple, which is far away, and it might not be the experience you're looking for, because you most likely will just be alone a lot and there's no programs. Because in my temple we don't have like a formal program. It's just like we leave you alone with your own thoughts and you have to face the reality that you're really ignorant and you got a lot of garbage in your head. And then once you realize that you're in a bad situation, then we can work on something. But not until you understand the severity of like how deluded you are, can we actually help you get out of it. Because you'll cling to things. You think you're right. You have all these preconceptions of what's right and wrong, but we want you to realize that basically everything you know is wrong. And once you get to that humble position, then we can work with you. But I don't know. Just give them a call. Give a call. Whoever. I think maybe Stevie. I said that because I thought Stevie said something once about my temple. If it's the same Stevie.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, if it's not, how can I ask the monks? I would just say, just be respectful. That's all. With the guidelines in terms of like asking them, just don't, be like, don't feel that don't be aggressive about, I deserve to be here, and you need to give me the right to be here, and like, hey, so when can I stay? Use common sense. But I'll say this just because some people aren't familiar with maybe what's common with a monastic, right? Which is why you ask, which is okay. That's perfectly understandable, and it's really great that you ask. But just in case, is that I would just be respectful. Just if you're in person, it might be nice if you do Anjali and with your hands together like this, and you just say, Venerable, is there a time that I could stay at the monastery for a few days? I'd really like to spend more time here and learn from you. Be humble, don't try to intrude on the space, and just be respectful. And as Bante said, you feel free to ask the monks. That's just the guideline, I would say. If that's what you're asking, you'll be perfectly fine. I feel like if you're asking the question, that means you're probably going to be respectful. Mm-hmm. It's more the people who wouldn't even ask. That's probably where people are likely to do something. Okay. Tribhuvan Kumar, I just complete 30 minutes Anapana Vipassana meditation, 4:30 a.m. to 5 a.m. Sadhu, sadhu. Oh, that's not sadhu.
That is good.
Yeah, that's not a question. That's great, though.
That one is a question.
Okay, Etienne. Dear Venerables, in my practice, I can easily focus on sadness, but I find it harder to be aware of and feel happiness and joy. How do I balance my practice and strengthen my feelings of joy?
So, if your mind focuses a lot naturally on sadness, then see what else is there. Maybe joy's too far away. Maybe you can find boredom. Maybe boredom's a little easier, right? Or maybe pain in the body from sitting for too long. So in the beginning, we just want to help our mind get unstuck, right? That's the main thing. We want to mind the gap, find the little gap between, that there is hope that we can break away. So just see anything else that's there. Even if it's like a booger coming out of your nose, focus on the booger then, whatever it is, focus on that and just train your mind not to always be resting on sadness and get it away. And then once you have the mind becomes malleable, right? As it says in the suttas, right? Plasticity, neuroplasticity, the Buddha first neuroscientist. Once your mind becomes malleable, it becomes more easy to work with. Then we can start going to joy and happiness and bliss. But in the beginning, it's just really get unstuck and just focus on anything else that's there. It should be better than sadness, right? Or at least it'll be different, so you'll get some break from sadness. So yeah, just try to work with making the mind a little bit more flexible, and then eventually you'll be able to work up into being in joy and other more wholesome and more pleasurable states.
Yes. If if your mind takes in the environment very kind of malleably, essentially,
Mhm.
and you get swept away by whatever arises in your environment, do you have any advice on owning in that focus? That way you focus on the wholesome and you don't focus on the unwholesome.
Yeah, my advice there would be like whatever sticks out the most then. Kind of like the opposite. Now find something that sticks out the most. So like maybe sounds are very strong. So instead of having you jump from like smelling, tasting, seeing, hearing, taste, thinking, and all this stuff, your mind's like always jumping from one thing to another. You're like, oh no, well, like this sense is very heightened for me. So I'll just focus on sounds now. And the mind jumps around. No, like I'm focusing on sounds. So whatever is like easier for you to grasp on instead of the opposite, like here you find something that you can really use as an anchor to stay there, and the mind's going to jump around and use that anchor. So the object of meditation can become anything. So just pick what's easier to use as your anchor, as your post to hold on to. And that's how I usually work with it when my mind's jumping around. Whatever's the easiest thing to grab onto and hold myself and keep my awareness, like there's where I'm going to keep it. It doesn't always have to be like my breath or loving kindness. Sometimes, some days it's just difficult.
Okay, Rick has a question. I have interacted with adults who have cluster B personality disorders. Some of them act from a mindset of extreme emotional immaturity. It is a challenge.
Yeah, definitely.
SD, Bante Sanata Vahari, I've always been curious. What is the significance of the tattoo on your shoulder?
Which one? I got an Air Force tattoo. I think you might mean the Chinese character, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right, that one?
I think they probably mean the whole thing. I didn't realize. Yeah, the whole thing, I guess. I didn't realize.
Yeah, the Chinese character means righteousness. And then I have a bunch of clouds and lightning because I was in the Air Force, and in all the Air Force devices, you see like clouds and lightning. Air Force devices, like what you carry here, and it says your career field, right? Like what your job is, and they'll have like most of them will have clouds and lightning, and they'll have like a falcon, and then they'll have all these other little things which let people know, like let people know what particular career field you're in. But yeah, those are the ones. Those are the three main tattoos I have there.
Probably gonna assume you checked that the Chinese character wasn't like steamed pork buns or something instead of righteous.
Oh yeah, I had already taken 2 years of Japanese
yeah.
at college level too. So
Okay, Manal says, Dear Venerables, I realized recently that one important way to absorb the Dhamma is by asking questions so the Dhamma could seep deeper. I struggle with asking the right questions because I have not ever been able to openly talk about personal experiences. I grew up in a very oppressive and abusive household. I don't know how to be more comfortable with verbal expression of inner thoughts.
So the important thing here is to start with someone that you trust, someone that's safe, right? Someone that you feel that you have a good relationship with for a long time. So, and then little by little, we begin to see that the world is not as dangerous as in the environment that we grew up in, right? And we can begin to change our adaptive strategies that we used in the past, and come up with new adaptive strategies in the present, which now would be like sharing, right? And asking more questions. That would be your new strategy. That'll be more beneficial, where in the past it was to be closed in order to protect yourself, right, from being criticized and being hurt, and or being rejected and things like that. So just really find a good friend, someone that you can trust, right, and slowly begin with them, and then little by little you'll get more confidence, and then you can go on to someone that you don't trust as much as this person, but you still trust them, right? And a good way to do this, if you don't have any friends, is like to go to therapy, right? Going to see a therapist is a good way, a counselor, or a chaplain, or someone who does that, right? Who's there to listen, and not necessarily they're trying to tell you what to do, right? So that's a good way to build up your trust if you don't trust anyone in your environment. And then also start creating maybe like new relationships. Maybe look for new friends and slowly build a new relationship where you do feel trust and you do feel safe and secure. But this is a long-term project, in reality, maybe a whole lifetime project to kind of feel comfortable asking questions. So we also have to have realistic expectations about, how this is going to play out in our day-to-day life and for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, one thing I don't know if this is helpful at all is just on a more small scale level, maybe not on a larger level, but on working away at when you do work on this strategy, is that heard and found helpful is that the wisest people look the most foolish, and the most foolish people will try to look wise. So I guess another more, maybe slightly more elegant way of saying it is that wise people don't try to look wise, foolish people do. And so if someone looks foolish, they just might be really wise. And if someone looks really wise, they just might be a really big fool, right? Because it's not always the case, but because the thing is that wise people have nothing to hide. They have nothing to prove, right? Because wisdom manifests as relinquishment. And another thing that I read at one point is there's one of the most famous meditation manuals from China. They talk about, because today I talked about samatha and vipassana, so it's on my mind. They talk about samatha and vipassana, and they say, forgive me if this is the first one is incorrect, but I remember the relevant one is they say if someone thinks I only want to practice samatha, then they're probably deluded, or they might be indulging in delusions. That might be wrong, but I do remember this. They say if they only want to practice vipassana, that's a manifestation of arrogance. And I found that really interesting, that they said that. I found that very interesting because it's like, what is that saying? I just want to know. I don't want to be calm. I don't want to let go. I just want to have the wisdom, the insight. I want to be the wise one. I want to be the one who knows. And it's like, no, you can't be the one who knows, because the one who knows isn't anyone, right? The one who knows has completely let go because there's no one to be the knower. So that's kind of the thing here, is that when we try to, what I found is, feeling like whenever there's a feeling of vulnerability, I kind of remind myself of that. And I remind myself that essentially any feeling of vulnerability is we're protecting ourselves, right? We're protecting ourselves. And it's very hard to let go, and you can't try to explain it away or spiritually bypass it. So that's why Bhante is saying it's going to be a process. But it's just something I mentioned is helpful, is remember, like, having this thing to hide, if it's because we feel that we can't reveal who we are because we should be better, or because other people might look at us in a certain way. They might think that we're more vulnerable or more weak than we really are, right? A lot of times we feel like we need to be protective of things, because if we're vulnerable, people will take advantage of us, right? And I mean, it's not that those types of fears they are protective strategies, as Bhante said, but another strategy is to kind of feel like I don't have anything to protect, right? And that's harder. And so that's why it's a process. But there is that gradual letting go of, okay, the most wise people, even the very wisest, they might look extremely foolish. They might seem the most unimpressive people. They might seem super vulnerable. And if someone is very, very vulnerable, that person might be more wise than someone who actually looks very wise, but inside they might be a train wreck, because they're just afraid to hide. They're afraid to show it. That's not wisdom, right? That's just appearing wise. So you set a good example for yourself and others by being vulnerable, and you express wisdom. It's a manifestation of wisdom, because it's a manifestation of relinquishment. It's a manifestation of non-attachment, of not being selfish and protective, and like this. And it's not that it's like you're a bad person, because usually this is done out of a sense of just wanting safety. It's not like necessarily a greediness in a kind of evil way, but it's a way of relating to vulnerability that I find helpful, where it's vulnerability is an expression of wisdom. Okay, Rick says, I have seen that when our beliefs or boundaries are unclear, we are more apt to argue about these issues with others. I find that many conflicts with others disappear when we know the facts and let go of self-doubt in relation to the issue being discussed. Do you have any reflections on this experience?
Yeah, that helps, but kind of like what Vada was saying, I found it very interesting that I always presume myself to be completely ignorant about anything. And that's a beautiful teaching that was reinforced, and I really took in when Aya Panyavati was here. And she gave a talk in the front, how she would have these reactions to reading things in the suttas, right? And she's like, it can't be that way. It should be this way, And then she's like, what do I know? I'm completely ignorant, like the Buddha knows it. Like I just had to humble myself down. So when I come into a conversation, I never come in thinking that I know anything. Like I'm just like, these are just my beliefs, actually. You know, I'm just sharing my beliefs and I don't really know them. You know, I'm kind of coming in. I make inferences from things that I experience, and these are my beliefs. And I find that approach very, very useful. But also, if you're confident in yourself, like here, I think it's important. You know who you are, right? You know your actions. Then that way you feel very secure. You don't have to argue with anyone if you know who you really are. But if you have doubts about the facts of who you really are, you're hiding those facts from yourself, then yeah, you're going to come in conflict with a lot of people. So I think what you're saying here is actually very skillful, but when we apply it to self-knowledge, to the facts about ourselves, right? I think in that context, like it could be a very powerful way to interact with the world.
Stevie has a silly question. Okay. Time moves slow at the center of a galaxy. Does Devas experience time differently? God, realms, in black holes. Okay. Are God realms in black holes?
I'm starting to suspect that you've been reading Bhante Punaji. Was he the same person who asked earlier?
Maybe. Was this the one? Yeah, this is the one who said they've been listening to like 10 hours of Bhante Punaji talks.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, Devas live for a long time, right? And each higher realm, like they perceive time a lot slower, right? Or because we're just going faster. So then it says that they live so long, and it does say that the Brahmas live at the center of the world system, right? And at the center of the world systems, in our world systems, at least the way we perceive what is to be a world system, is a galaxy. And at the center of the galaxy, there's more mass, right? Usually a big black hole in the center of a galaxy, and time goes slower. So we can make some inferences, right? About like, okay, if there is some sort of connection between the description in the suttas of these Deva worlds and the way we perceive reality as humans, which we know that is a mirage to begin with, right? So we're already starting off from a bad place. We can make an inference that there is a likelihood that if there's any connection there, they would be in this sort of place, right? So yeah, I think it's an interesting thing, to kind of think about. But even I never knew Bhante Punaji to like declare it as a fact. Like that's a fact. I know for sure for myself. I've seen it with myself, and I saw Brahma when he was there. Or anything like that. So, but it does. A lot of the things that Bhante Punaji was trying to do, and he says in his book, Buddha the Radical Shrink, when he starts off, he's like, I use a lot of Western concepts as bridges for people to come over to the Dhamma, but I'm not saying that they're the same or that one validates the other. Like they're completely different things, but I'm using it in order to help you kind of like what it's kind of like the Buddha did with the king as Vijnana. Like, yeah, Vijnana's not a king, but it can be a useful way to think about Vijnana, right? So Bhante Punaji would use like our modern materialistic or psychological understanding of the world, as a metaphor to help us understand the Dhamma, right? But I'm a sci-fi geek, so I'm all into what you're saying. People who know me know I'm all into sci-fi, so I love this kind of stuff. But I know that that's my own kind of like liking, and I lean to it, but I don't take myself too seriously. Oh, he did say Sarachana Buddhist temple. Yeah, so then yeah.
Okay. SD, as monastics, are you allowed to cook your own food? If not, who cooks for you? Do you take turns at the temple/monasteries?
Mata, you can answer this one.
Okay. So are we allowed to cook our own food? Yeah, we are allowed to cook our own food, but it's sort of, you could say it's discouraged, and it's really only in emergencies or in situations where it's really necessary. So it's not a major precept, like it's not something, but I'll at least say if you do cook, it's not a big deal. A more big deal is if you're buying the food. Mm-hmm. That's a bigger deal. In generally speaking, in monastic communities, right? If someone were to buy on food, because we don't use money, and the money has to be relinquished, and if you buy something with money, that item has to be relinquished. So there's many, many rules that would go into that. But if you already have someone donates, let's say, food to you, and you cook it, generally speaking, it's not allowed. Now, if say there's some kind of sick person and it's necessary or it's medicinal, then things can come up and it can be allowed. And also there's a difference between cooking from raw ingredients and reheating, actually. So if you're just reheating food, my understanding is that's not even That's no breach whatsoever.
Mhm.
So that is completely allowed. Versus cooking from raw ingredients, which is a little bit more restricted, and the details don't really matter. Generally speaking, we just don't cook unless there was some particular other external reason to for someone else usually. And then if not, who cooks for you? Well, the lay people cook for us because we have a beautiful symbiotic relationship with lay people where we don't use money, we don't cook food. um, so people bring us food, and we also aren't allowed to store food overnight. So in the monastery, we are, because it, conditions are different from say in the forest in ancient India. Here we do have a kitchen with food in it and a pantry, but none of that is actually being stored by us because in the morning, the monks can't take it. Technically, I can actually offer it because I'm a novice, but it's not the full monastic precepts like a fully ordained bhikkhu and bhikkhuni. They cannot store it overnight. So that food has to be offered every day by someone else. So it's kind of like the pantry and the fridge, that's being stored by the people who can offer that food. The monks aren't able to store it because even if they were, oh, I'm going to store this, the next morning they couldn't use it without breaking a rule. And so the lay people bring food and they offer food every day, and they get to make lots of merit. They get to come to the monastery, they get to learn the Dhamma, or at least encounter the Dhamma and be in a spiritual space. And the monastics get to cultivate gratefulness, and we get to cultivate contentment because we don't get to pick what we eat. We get to cultivate reflecting on the importance of spiritual cultivation and spiritual practice because people are supporting us to live this way, right? So there's a sense of responsibility and a sense of, making sure that we maintain this relationship with one another to benefit ourselves and the lay people bringing the food. So there's this relationship that's built out of the precepts where because we don't cook food, we rely on other people to sustain our life and sustain our practice. And those people, because we don't cook food, they are able to come to the monastery and make offerings of food, right? It's a blameless offering because if we did grow food in the garden and then pick it and then cook it and we bought food with our own money, then we wouldn't need lay people to come here at all.
Close the doors. Don't let them in.
Yeah. The only reason lay people would come here is if we just decided, just because we want to, basically. Just because we want lay people to come. But if you look in history, that's, if people are living monastic communities who are completely independent, a lot of monastics, they like to be alone. So it's kind of like maybe they allow lay people in sometimes, but every day to see lay people all the time, constantly, a lot of times people wouldn't choose to do that because think if every day someone came into your house, because this is our residence, every day they came to your house and they walked in and they made themselves at home and they had to offer you food every day because you couldn't actually have food on your own. You couldn't cook it, you couldn't store it, you couldn't buy it. They had to offer you that food. Every day they came to your house. And then someone gave you the option, actually, I'll give you money and you don't have to worry about working. You don't have to worry about doing anything. You can just DoorDash food to your home any day you want. Which would you choose, right? Most people wouldn't want every single day someone to walk in their house and have to be dependent like that, right? It's not like a pleasurable thing. Now, we make it pleasurable because it's beautiful and it cultivates spiritual qualities. So it is pleasurable on a higher level. But in a general sense, for most people, from a worldly perspective, it's not really pleasant. Okay. So we learn to really appreciate it. And actually, I personally, I really like living this way. And I assume Bante likes living this way because he's a monk. So we really like living this way. And we like seeing the lay people because it's so beautiful. But if it weren't for that, it probably wouldn't be that beautiful. It probably wouldn't happen. And do you take turns at the temple, I assume, for dana? Like when people come to
if
the
we did
monastery?
cook, did we take turns cooking and
Oh.
stuff like that? No, but I mean, going to what Vada was saying, like it could be completely random people that you've never met before. Like in Asia, like anyone can anyone who's Buddhist in the entire country can just show up at any time during the proper time the meal's supposed to be offered and give it. So like you have people that you've never known just show up, and give you food, and you know how they prepared it. You don't know what ingredients they use. Like so you're in a very vulnerable situation to let all these you're uncomfortable. It can be very uncomfortable, for a regular person. Nobody would want anyone just from like the US, random person showing up to your house and bringing you food and you don't even know what this person is. That's the reality of it in Buddhist countries, any Buddhist can just show up, so you have to be prepared for that. So yeah, it's actually not something desired by most people. I would think so.
Yeah. But very good
Yes.
for our practice. Manal says, Bante, my question was geared towards asking questions related to the Dhamma and to other venerables like yourself and others. Thank you so much for your valuable insights.
I mean, in that case, it's easier. Just ask them, And if the monk doesn't want to answer, they're just going to say, "Oh, I don't want to talk about it," or "This is not the right time," or "We can talk about it later." So actually, that's a very safe place. You should feel very comfortable in asking monks.
Yeah. And the wise thing still applies. Definitely, very much. I don't know if this is a question. Nope. Shelley Lim asks, Dear Venerables, would you agree that meditation is not always relaxing sometimes? I feel that negative feelings arise at times when I meditate. Does equanimity arise the more you meditate?
Well, the last one, yes, right? If you're properly meditating, more equanimity will arise. But yeah, I love this. I love this question because a lot of the time, especially in the beginning, meditation is uncomfortable, and you don't want to do it. It's like uncomfortable psychologically, physically painful, right? There's a lot of pressure not to do it. Like people want you to go out and do other things with them, and you're wasting your time there, and you feel weird. Like, am I even doing this right? And so yes, in the beginning it's like that. And I like to equate it like going to the gym, right? In the beginning you feel weird, like look at all these people, they know what they're doing here. And I don't know what I'm doing. I look like a clown in the gym. And then you go and the next day it hurts. And you're like, oh, I feel worse. I don't feel better. And you look at the mirror, you don't look any better either. It takes a long time, many weeks or months for you to look better, right? And even after you get really good, I mean, no matter how long you run, you're always susceptible to injury, or maybe someone cuts you off when you're running. Or if you're working out, you're always susceptible to injury there, or maybe you don't get the machine that you want to use sometimes, so you have to wait for the weight. So no matter what you do in life, you're going to be uncomfortable, but this one at least has a point where there is the possibility of being forever happy, Sukha, Nibbanam Paraman Sukham. Nibbana is the highest pleasure, and it's in a certain way we can say it's everlasting, although there's no time and space. But besides that, so yes, it's very natural to feel more awareness, especially if we're a person who's always is not a very introspective person naturally, and our attention is always directed externally. When we begin to look inside, we begin to see all the mess that's there, right? A lot of people, when they come to meditation, they're like, Bhante, when I meditate, there's more thoughts. It's like, no, those thoughts are always there, but you're just not aware of them because you're always distracting yourself with the outside stuff. But now that you're sitting here, you realize the tornado and storm that's going on in your mind of thoughts and emotions and feelings. So yes, I want to completely validate your experience and normalize it as, that's the way it is. The more you practice, if you practice the proper way, there's more equanimity. So if there isn't equanimity, like after many months of practice, if you don't see wholesome states increasing in your practice, then you know what? Try a different practice. You want to change your method or the way you're meditating, or even the posture, or whatever you have to do, because the proof is in the taste of the pudding.
Yeah. And I'd also just add to what Bhante said that was very beautiful, is that the way we approach meditation too, like Bhante's saying, we can expect it, but also if we approach meditation, a lot of times when people learn about meditation, they think, oh, it's about emptying your mind and relaxing, right? And I think that's part of where your question's coming from, is that's what we're doing. That's the point of it, right? And yes, kind of, but also not really, because the principle of I do this and I get pleasure, that's how we relate to sensuality. That's what craving is. So the idea that I do something, I act, I do some ritual, or I do some action, or I engage in some object, and then I get pleasure and relaxation out of it, you might as well go to a massage, because a massage is much less likely to give rise to negative feelings, right? It's almost always going to be pleasurable because it's distracting you from things and it's very pleasant physically. So that's not how we relate to meditation. We don't relate to meditation as this activity that we do that relaxes us. And then when it doesn't go right, it's like a mistake, just like a massage, right? If you went to a massage and you think, okay, massages are supposed to be relaxing, and then the person is not doing it right, and the pain is not the right type of pain, and it doesn't feel better the next day, then you would say, oh, that not right? It's not supposed to be that way. But it's not like that with meditation. It's not like if you do meditation and then you're not getting the relaxation, the goal of relaxation and pleasure out of it, that it's not serving you. Now, that is what Bhante said is also very true, though. That if you have been practicing for a long time and it's only getting worse or it's not getting better, something's not going right. So there is the outcome of relaxation over time, but that's not we don't relate to it like I'm going to get relaxation out of this. We relate to it like I'm going to let go of agitation, right? And one form of agitation is wanting to get relaxation, right? So an example is also sleeping. And Bhante gave this example recently, and it's very true, is that if you go to bed thinking, time to sleep, now I must sleep, sleep, get the sleep state. And you're told sleep is very relaxing. Oh, it's so nice to be sleeping. It's a nice rest for your mind. And you're like, when I try to sleep, it's so agitating. And it's kind of like, yes, it is very agitating if you relate to sleep as a state that you need to force and get, and if you don't get it, it's wrong. No, sleep happens when you just let go. You stop engaging with the world and you just kind of let go, and your mind will enter sleep. It's the same with meditation, except we don't want to be dull and sleepy, but we let go of agitation, we let go of craving, we let go of desire, and that's why equanimity arises. That's why relaxation arises, because it's a very different form of relaxation. It's totally different. A massage is relaxing because you do something or you go towards something out of craving and you get pleasure. Meditation, when done properly, cultivation, practice, is relaxing because you let go of the need to do anything. You don't have to do anything. You don't even have to meditate. You just let go. And at a certain point, you don't even let go. There's no you letting go. It's just complete freedom. And that's why it's so relaxing, so equanimous, so peaceful. And so, yeah, negative states arise when we want to let go and we can't, or we want to get there, all the things Bhante said. But I just wanted to point out, if you relate to it that way, it's probably going to lead you in a painful place, because it will actually block you. And it happens to very advanced meditators. Sometimes meditators, they get into deep states, or just all of a sudden, you get some experience, and then they want to go back. It's like, I want to get that again. And wanting to get it again is what stops it, because it was a state of letting go. So, yeah.
And also, for many people in the West, they relate to meditation differently because it's being commodified and commercialized, right? And that's the way it's sold. Like, get this app, this meditation app, and you'll feel relaxed and comfortable. Or come to our retreat and you'll feel relaxed and comfortable. Read this book and it'll increase your relaxation and be more comfortable and happy. I mean, so it's being sold to you that way. So you're thinking of this transaction, and when the transaction doesn't go like the massage, you're like, what? I'm gonna go write a Yelp review. Like, this is wrong, right? Like, this is not the way it's supposed to be. But that's not the context of meditation or even the Dhamma or Buddhism at all. Like, this is a completely different context. This Western context, this Western approach, or this bias, cultural lens that we bring to the Dhamma is not the way the Dhamma is supposed to be seen or practiced, right? So we have to be aware of our own lenses that we bring, our own views that we bring, and how we relate to the Dhamma, not only meditation, but all of it, right? Like, even giving. I give to the monks, so the monks should be nice to me. I give to the monks, so they should make time to see me. I give to the monks, so when I don't know, they should let me arrange the temple a certain way. Like, no, that's not the way. We're not doing transactions here, right? It's not like I do this, I get that. Like, meditation is not like that. Giving is not like that. Practicing the precepts is not like that. Like, if I do this, I go to heaven, right? Like, no, we're not doing things like that. That is not the system that's working here. So we kind of need to completely change our way of seeing the world and the way we think about the world.
Yeah. And just as Bhante is saying, it's with the negative states too. It's like a garden, right? We don't work on the garden, and we think, oh, this is for the beautiful flowers. But then we work on the weeds, and it's like, well, I was told that if I do gardening, I get a beautiful garden. No. You do get that once you do the hard work. And so it's the same with negative states. They will arise, and it will be painful because most of the time we spend distracting ourselves from those things. That's kind of how we spend our time. At least that's how I spend a lot of my time. It's like when if something is uncomfortable, we crave. Naturally, the mind does that. And we can't help it, because if we could help it, we'd be arahants. So if you're not an arahant, probably you spend, I would guess, at least 90% of your time ignoring or hiding from the reality of things, not even trying to face it, right? So we try to face it all the time, but even when we're trying, the mind doesn't want to see it. So yeah, it's really hard work. but it's also very relaxing because the hard work is the work of letting go. Okay, SD says, do you have any recommendations for good books that explain the suttas or Pali Canon in English?
I think a good place to start is Bhikkhu Bodhi's Anthology. I think it's called In the Words of the Buddha, right? Yeah, the blue book.
In the Buddha's words.
In the Buddha's words. Yeah, that's a good place to start. And then after that, I mean, just jump straight into the suttas. Yeah.
Right. Kumo says, Dear Venerables, why is it not okay for monks to grow food and or damage plant life intentionally? Any explanations for that rule?
Well, I think the growing food is, one, if you grow food, you're going to be messing with the environment a lot, right? So there's a lot of things. You could be hurting living beings. Anyone who cultivates the land, they know that they have to kill bugs, and you have to get like rodents and other animals away, and you have to deal with all these living creatures. So that's a big mess right there already, right? And if you grow food, think about all the steps that you need to go through. Like, you need to have money, you need to have tools, you need, like, it's a whole project, and it's going to take you away from what you dedicated your life to, which is like being a monastic, cultivating the spiritual path, right? So it's like, that's a career. Like, to grow food is a career, right? It might be a part-time career, part-time job, or a full-time job, but it's a job, and it's taking you away from what you're doing, right? So like, it would be a whole purpose is to renounce everything as a monastic, right? We're not like, I renounce everything but farming. Like, I want to still be a part-time farmer or a full-time farmer. No, then that's something else. Being a farmer is something else, And being a monastic is leaving everything behind. At least in the Buddhist tradition, a monastic, a wanderer, a sramana, a mendicant monk, is letting everything go, all the roles. You're dropping all the roles, all the jobs. You have no job. You're jobless. You're homeless. You're familyless. You're tradeless. You're everything. Casteless, right? All these things you have to drop. And that's why, growing the food, besides the practical things of like maybe harming creatures that we don't want to do, would be one. Intentionally explain that for me. Any other thoughts about that?
Not really. I guess the one thing I'd say is that there is an explanation for that rule, which is that in the time of the Buddha, some people perceived plants as sentient. And so it was seen as very cruel to kind of just injure them needlessly by people. And so, as Bhante was saying, we don't really have a need to do it. And if other people kind of complain about it and a lot of people perceive it as cruel, then it's sort of like, well, then just don't do it. And so that is actually the main explanation that you see in the canon, is that people perceive it as what's called one faculty life.
Mm-hmm.
And how that was understood is that they have a sense of touch. They have one sense, which is the sense of touch. So plants, they feel things. Like, they don't necessarily think, so they don't really have a mind how we do, but they kind of understood it, like the Jains and I believe the Ajivikas, and probably many folk people, we're all folk people, but many people who have a folk religion, which isn't necessarily formalized doctrine, they tend to relate to life in a little bit, plant life in a little bit more of a sentient way. It's very common across the world, and that was true of India as well. And so that's the kind of one of the explanations. So it's very true, the farming thing, that's very true. But there is this other explanation, which is also the cultural context. And I think that probably the farming is more relevant to us nowadays, and it's still relevant. But sometimes people actually do think plants are sentient today. Not uncommon. Rick says, Venerables, I have peacefully let go of many things. My dog puts a strain on me and my limited resources, but I can't imagine letting them go. How do we know whether we should or should not let go of important things in our life? I was just concerned that Rick was about to say,
how do I let go of my dog? Yeah. Like, no, you have to take care of her. You took that responsibility. He's your baby. Don't let go, or she's your baby. Don't let go of the dog.
So, Bhante, any thoughts on how do we know whether we should let go or not of important things?
Well, when they're making your life miserable, when there's no benefit in it, right? And no benefit for others and no benefit for all. So when anything's becoming detrimental towards you, towards others, and to everyone in general, that's the ideal situation to let things go. So when something's getting us away from, it's a detriment to our physical health, mental health, spiritual health, then it's time to start, making our way away from that thing or person even, But, if you have children or if you have a pet, someone whose life depends on you, like an elderly parent, that is going to look very different. than in another in other situations, right? Because you took on that responsibility. Someone's life depends on you. And Buddhism is all about harmlessness, right? Not harming living beings. And you can harm a living being by abandoning them, right? Because they're going to die without you, like a baby or someone who needs medical care. So you would have to set up the conditions, right, for that person to be able to survive and be taken care of once you leave them. But yes, always at the same time looking at like, well, you don't want to sacrifice your life for someone else's, right? So then it's like, well, they'll be fine, but I'll be miserable, and and because then it's just a trade-off. It's like one life for another, and we're trying to optimize all lives at once, right, to the best ability. That's the hierarchy of Buddhist actions. Like the best action are those that are beneficial for me, beneficial for others, beneficial for all. The second one is beneficial for me, maybe not beneficial for others. The third one is beneficial for others, maybe not for me. And the one that should never be done is not beneficial for me, not beneficial for others, not beneficial for all, right? So the ideal that we're always trying to strive for in Buddhism is harmony, everyone's well-being, right? And then we go down that scale. But if someone's life depends on you, we have to put in place the necessary conditions for that person's life to continue.
Yeah, and I feel like also one thing that comes to mind is when we talk about letting go, sometimes we can get very black and white, right? Of like, either this thing is in my life and I'm totally immersed in it, or I let go and it's like, see you never, talk to my palm, talk to my hand. But it doesn't have to be that way. Often it might be like that. If you have a very difficult relationship, sometimes with people, especially, it gets really complicated, right? And it's like if I engage a little bit, then they expect a lot, and it's just it's hard to navigate. But sometimes, I'm just throwing this out there, is that if there's something that you feel like, should I let go of this? And it's very important, not a small thing. It might be that you can have a healthy relationship with it without, you can let go of it without making it disappear from your presence, right? Like sometimes that is an option. So sometimes we have to say, you know what? I have to set a boundary. I have to set a barrier. I have to let go of a certain aspect of this. But that doesn't mean I'll never talk to you again and I cannot speak to you, or I'll never do X, Y, Z. Sometimes it does mean that, but just throwing it out there that, really consider like, what is the most appropriate, or what is another alternative to what I might think is the only option here? Because sometimes there's something that we don't know. SD says, do you always wear your robes when traveling?
Yes, all the times, even to bed, very often.
Yeah. And we don't have we always wear robes, and we also don't put on pants.
Yeah.
Well, usually, unless I've seen some monastics who wear, like in the winter or something, they might wear long johns, but we don't wear lay clothing like with a robe on top of it. It's kind of a thing.
Yeah.
ST says, why are your robes different colors?
We use different ink. That's a simple answer, just different ink. There's no reason. Yeah.
Okay, Julie says, I've been getting bursts of energy either during meditation or after Satipatthana Vipassana meditation. Are there any suttas that discuss this? Anything the Buddha said we can do to help with this? I think it's maybe related to restlessness or craving. I assume bursts of energy, like activity, I guess, restless.
I think there's a difference between like feeling like a joyful energy, motivation, right? Like, yeah, I feel like good and clear, like I can do stuff, I can meditate longer, right? And this enthusiasm for the Dhamma and more teachings and living the Dhamma, that's one thing. Restlessness is something else, Restlessness is something like being fidgety, being anxious, not a mind that's shaking all the time. It's jumping from one thing to another. So if you're experiencing that, then you're experiencing a hindrance, right? In the meditation. And the Buddha says that actually breathing is probably the number one thing. I think I remember in the little scale thing, it doesn't necessarily match up, but later in the commentaries or the tradition organizes it like, oh, breathing is good for anxiety and worry, to overcome anxiety and worry. Focusing on the breath, right? So the breath becomes slow, it becomes calm. You focus on the sensations. It kind of takes you away from everything, and you come into the body more. So this kind of awareness of the body is to help you with restlessness and anxiety, which usually is like a emotional or a psychic thing, I think, in the mind that's going on, not necessarily in our bodies so much. But I myself, when I hear the Dhamma, when I'm around monks, or when I'm really focused on Dhamma practice, man, like right now you could probably tell, like I get all like revved up, like I get excited, and it's good and it feels good, and there's no anger like those times in my mind, and there's no greed, and there's no sadness, and there's no fear. So actually, I'm actually always trying to keep it going. This enthusiasm, this passion for the Dhamma is something that I really love, and it doesn't bother my meditation because we just came from meditation. I mean, and I had a very similar level. I think now it's a little bit higher, but I had that enthusiasm there, and it didn't really express itself as anxiety or worry. Instead, it expressed itself as like determination, like, oh yeah, now we're gonna do this, yeah, and I'm gonna sit down. I'm really gonna get to like practice, because this is what I dedicated my life to. So if it's restlessness and worry, then we focus on the breath. That's one of the things you can do. Also, metta helps too, but metta also comes with a little bit of joy, so it might be too energetic. So maybe just try some more breathing.
Yeah, I also just wanted to say that I don't know if this was your experience, but I've had experiences where I'm meditating and then all of a sudden you get this, and it's like, I want to bow to the Buddha 10,000 times. I need to run around this room and be like, yeah, Dhamma practice. And it's kind of this flood of energy and rapture, but it's not tranquil. Like I'm not saying, I'm not talking about entering the first jhana or something, but it's like rapture, and it's hard to stay still. But it's related to the Dhamma. It's related to faith in the Buddha or faith in the Dhamma, or it's Dhamma related. Like what you're saying, Satipatthana, maybe you start to see how things are working, or you start to relax into things, and then all of a sudden it's so exciting and it's energetic and it's blissful, but it's not settled, it's calm, it's mixed with that restlessness. And if that's what you're experiencing, because it's a phenomenon that I've experienced, so it might be what you're experiencing. And I found like it has to be grounded, because it doesn't lead into tranquility. That's what we want. And as Bhante was saying, restlessness is a hindrance. So it's not like restlessness, like anxiety or agitation, but it's almost like too enthusiastic. Too like you can't sit still. It's very hard to sit still. Or if you do sit still, the mind doesn't settle. And in that experience, what I found was that my mind it wasn't agitated about other things, but the emotion was very strong, but I could sit still. And if that's what you're doing, I would say maybe, okay, you're saying yes. So I would say maybe if that's what you're doing, like what I found is you have to learn how to ground it, because you want it. It's good enthusiasm. It's good, pleasant experience, but it's not going in the right direction yet, because it's a little bit misguided by, you could say restlessness. It's restless. It's restless, and it's a little bit, it's not calm, it's not stable, it's not pervasive, it's not unifying the mind. So I would say you could say absorb into it, but try to sit with it. Try to sit back in the body, as Bhante said, get back in the body. But if you can, stay sitting, because I think actually that you want to be able to rest into that and transform it, because that experience will lead you onward in the path. Because it is very powerful to have that such strong like rush of rapture and energy, but you have to be able to sit and integrate it into your body. So in the simile of the first jhana, the Buddha talks about kneading like this. The hands are kneading water into dough. And so again, this is not the first jhana. This experience is not the first jhana. But you can use that simile to say, okay, I'm having this experience of bliss, but it's not kneaded in. The Buddha is saying that the experience of bliss and energy should be completely integrated, completely united, not dripping out at all. And so if you're not there, try to lean into that. Try to go back into the body. And to be honest, it's difficult because, like I said, it feels to me what it felt like sometimes is like, I want to do 10,000 prostrations in 5 minutes. Or I need to like run around in a circle in the meditation hall. Like, I don't want to do anything else. I want to meditate. I want to be in the meditation hall, but my mind is so energetic and so enthusiastic that I can't. And so it's kind of like, maybe you do need to do prostrations. Maybe you should do prostrations if you know how to do bowing. If you have a Buddha Rupa, you could do bowing. But I would say the most ideal thing is to try to knead it into your bodily experience. And this was also advice that I got from other monastics when I talked about this with them. So try to knead it into your experience, not just of the physical body, but integrating it into a still, calm, absorbed, unified, because that will lead you onwards into deeper states. Sorry that I went a little bit off there, but I thought I knew what you're talking about. Okay, SD says quickly, could you ever see yourselves going back to lay life?
I don't want to, but I'm very realistic, and I know like if some horrible thing would happen to my family and they needed my help, that's the one condition I would do it. If I knew like they can only survive with me, like they need an extra income or someone to take care of them, and I can't do that as a monk, like for my mom or my sister or any of my loved ones, then I would. But as soon as that's solved, then I just come back into ropes again. I'm just doing it for them, and then I'll come back. But like long term or like me wanting to, no, it'd have to be out of necessity.
Yeah, it's the same with me. I haven't thought about the specifics of a family situation, but if it was absolutely necessary or whatever, then you just make do. SD, if someone gave you DoorDash cards, could you call a restaurant and order food for yourselves?
Yes, it is allowable. It is allowable.
Yeah, we can use gift cards. The reason is because the Buddha allowed people to give money to a store or a shopkeeper and us to use that as a tab. So a gift card is just an indication that someone else already paid the company. So gift cards are allowable.
But don't send us visas like credit cards. Yeah, we can't take those.
Yeah.
This is cash basically.
Yeah.
It's money.
It has to be prepaid to a store. It can't be like
Yeah.
a debit card itself. Bante, why are you always going after Empty Cloud? When will you be back? I will miss you. Where are you going after Empty Cloud? I'm sorry.
Okay. I was like, what? The way you read it, I was like, cryptic. Where are you going? I'm going back to my temple for a few weeks because I haven't been there since February. And when will I be back here? Sometime next year. I don't know when, but probably, yeah, sometime next year, but not in the spring. Yeah.
Great. And thank you, Rick. Very kind words. And okay, it looks like we're close. Just Andre says, I wish you the best and I wish you progress in Dhamma. Sadhu sadhu. Question, what is the most enjoyable part of your day, most enjoyable part of being a monk from day to day?
Wow, there's so many things that I like. I don't know if I can pick one thing. I mean, I do love when like coming across other people who are enthusiastic about the Dhamma. Most of the time that's monastics, but a lot of the time it's lay people too. So when you see that person and they're just like as motivated, we can be meditating, we can be studying suttas, we can be cleaning the temple. That doesn't really matter. But coming across people who share that, interest in Dhamma, I think that's the best part. Like I feed off of them, and it's like a force multiplier where I just feel even stronger than I would by myself.
Yeah, that's similar. I feel the same. Yeah. Being in the environment, honestly, day to day, just the enthusiasm for the Dhamma, the same when I have those moments, which is often. That's my favorite part. Potential for practice. And Kumo Bante S, what is the name of the book you mentioned by Bante Punaji?
Oh, Buddha, the Radical Shrink. You can find it online. It wasn't printed here. It was printed in Malaysia. You can send an email to Mahavihara in Malaysia. It's called Buddha, the Radical Shrink.
In the chat, and we're over time here.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Everyone knows already.
So we'll have to go. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Yes, and please have a beautiful evening. And maybe we'll just close with 3 sadhus. Yes. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Oh, thank you.
You're practicing cultivation bear fruit.
Yes. Have a good one. Stay safe this weekend. Stay warm, stay cold, depending on your environment. Hydrate, eat well, take care of each other. Bye-bye.